My fiancé let his family harass me over my late father's past, so I publicly exposed their darkest secrets and kicked them out of my life. But fast forward to now, he's back, standing in my parking lot at midnight, watching my window, thinking of what to do to me. My fiancé and his family ridiculed my deceased father at our engagement party, so I gave him my wedding ring and never looked back. I'm 31, and a few months ago, I used to be engaged to Ben. We met at a work party about 5 years ago, and I still remember how he got everyone laughing with these weirdest trivia facts. Ben came from money. His family owned a chain of medical practices, and his parents Richard and Caroline were obsessed with what they called good breeding. At first I thought they were just snobby, but over time I realized it went deeper than that. As for my parents, my mom wasn't in the picture, and my dad died 3 years ago from liver failure. He was an alcoholic for most of my childhood, but got sober when I was 15. The last 13 years of his life he worked as an addiction counselor and helped dozens of people get clean. I became a social worker because of him. Ben knew all this and always seemed supportive. The problem started at a country club brunch with Ben's parents. Caroline asked about my family medical history for insurance purposes, and I told her about my dad's addiction and recovery. She literally froze mid-smile. Richard cleared his throat and changed the subject. Later, Ben pulled me aside and suggested maybe I shouldn't mention the addiction thing to other people. I should have seen the red flags then, but I brushed it off. Things got worse at a family dinner when Ben's brother Mark, who's a doctor, started making jokes about genetics and addictive personalities. He'd wait until I took a sip of wine, then say things like, "You know, addiction runs in families." Caroline was no better. Her eyes followed my hand every time I reached for my glass, and I didn't miss the way her lips pursed when I poured a second one. Ben's sister Lisa leaned forward and said, "I've been reading about children of alcoholics, and apparently they're 3 times more likely to develop problems." She said it like she was discussing the weather. When I mentioned it to Ben later, he laughed and said, "They're just looking out for you. Don't worry, my parents love you," all while rubbing my shoulder reassuringly. But after that conversation, I overheard Ben talking about genetic screening and protecting family assets. When I confronted him, he finally admitted the truth. His parents wanted me to sign papers agreeing to genetic counseling before we had kids because they wanted to test me for addiction genes. He tried to encourage me to do it, saying alcoholism runs in families. If my own fiancé not trusting me wasn't bad enough, I later found out that someone had printed my dad's obituary and used a yellow highlighter on every mention of his addiction. They'd circled years of struggle and battle with alcoholism, like they were building a case against me. The engagement party was when everything exploded. Richard stood up with his champagne glass and gave a toast about choosing partners with good genes and being grateful for their clean family history. He looked right at me when he said clean. Caroline chimed in about how some families have unfortunate weaknesses that get passed down like a curse. She too stared right at me when she said curse. Mark made a crack about how at least I'd know the signs when our kids start drinking, and everyone laughed. I had never felt so humiliated, and I honestly couldn't believe that Ben wasn't saying anything. He was just sitting there sipping his wine and glancing at me to make sure I wasn't touching the wine bottle. Honestly, I thought that was the most awful it would get. But then Richard announced they'd hired a private investigator to research my family history and proceeded to pull out a folder from God knows where and started reading from it. They'd found records of my grandfather's alcoholism and my great-uncle's addiction. They'd tracked down distant cousins with DUIs. They actually made a family tree on poster board with all the affected members marked in red ink. My dad's name was circled 3 times. Richard held it up like he was presenting evidence in court. The final straw was when Caroline suggested I should consider getting sterilized to avoid passing on the addiction gene. She said it like she was doing me a favor. Ben just sat there nodding along, but I had enough. I stood up in front of everyone and told them about Caroline's Xanax addiction that she